Welcome to Commercial Unlocked, the podcast where we break down commercial real estate and unlock how it actually works. I'm Sam Klein, a commercial real estate broker here in the Carolinas. Each episode, we'll talk through deals, markets, and decisions that shape commercial real estate, from leasing and development to investing and community growth. You'll hear from business owners, city leaders, developers, and people on the ground doing the work. Because I think commercial real estate isn't just about the buildings, it's about the people. Whether you're a business owner, investor, or just trying to understand how commercial real estate really works, you are in the right place. Now let's get into it. Episode 3, Commercial Unlocked, coming at you. We're going to talk today about timing. We're going to talk about the market. Is now the right time to sell? Is now the right time to extend your lease? Is now the right time to make a move? Of course, I deal with this a lot in my business. People are constantly wondering about when the right time is to do something. And probably the biggest mistake I see people make is paying attention to the outside world and considering large global forces instead of really just considering what's going on in their business. It probably comes from considering what's going on in their business and thinking, hey, is it now time to add a new product line, hire more people, expand my business? But unfortunately, when we allow that outside noise to come in, we start to get analysis paralysis and potentially make poor decisions. A good example, the president of Venezuela was recently, made headline news. Does that affect your business? And a lot of people might raise their hand and say yes, because they're worried that with the federal government being involved, that we'll have some uncertainty and things will slow down. And I might argue that I think if you've got a smaller based business in Gaston County, it's going to have very little effect actually on your business. On the flip side of that, or to play the other side of the coin, let's think about if your business is regulated in any way, shape, or form by the government. So I believe recently, certain THC-based stores that sold products, the government came out and limited the amount of concentration that can go into those products. So they now have, I think, another year left to sell what they've started with and have to pivot and create something different. That is a time, of course, when the federal government or state government can have a very heavy involvement with your business. So two things to consider, A, is the political climate, is the outside world really affecting your business, or is it not? And again, a lot of my job is to decide or help you decide, is that really something that's giving you pause? How about we normalize fear a little bit in this process, okay? If I own a business and I employ people, I think one of the things I respect most about that is meeting payroll every week. And I meet a lot of business owners who take that very personally. I mean, you're meeting payroll, you're also responsible in a lot of ways. In your mind, you're responsible for people's families, people's future. So if I'm doing that and it's now time to decide, like, am I going to buy a bigger facility? Am I going to pivot? Am I going to make a move? Am I going to change? I think that there should be some fear that goes along with that. It's healthy. Borrowing money should create some sense of fear. It shouldn't be easy to do. It should be very strategically done. If you don't borrow money, I respect that. If you do, and you do so carefully, there are a lot of people who benefit from SBA lending or various other types of lending. I'm not going to go off on a debt speech, but that should cause some fear. Growth should create some fear. So the idea that we feel a little bit of fear is a good thing. And I try to help people to the best of my ability kind of like navigate those waters. There's plenty of things as we venture into this new world that, kind of post-COVID, that have created additional stresses and additional fears about making a move. We've got higher interest rates, obviously, than we had a couple years ago. Material shortages seem to have calmed down somewhat, but at a certain point during COVID, it might have taken you a year or even two to get an electrical component. If you were considering an expansion with a major electrical upfit as part of your business expansion, that could have caused you a lot of fear. Labor rates have changed drastically. They needed to, but all those things combined have made expanding a little trickier, a little bit more expensive, and created that fear. And what happens is, as an owner, we tend to sort of freeze and hold tight to what we have and become conservative. And that uncertainty and that hesitation, again, some of that is okay, but some of it becomes an inability to make a decision to move forward. And again, let's assess your gross numbers. Let's look at how much, if your sales have gone up 15 to 20% every year, it's time for a bigger space. It's time for more people. It's time for more trucks. It's time to consider something different. I'm not going to comment a ton on the interest rate. In my experience, I will be 50 in June, so I'm not old, but not young anymore either. Somewhere lost in the middle. So in my experience, having been alive for at least a couple of economic cycles, an interest rate that's 5 and 6% can support a healthy economy as long as inflation hasn't run away. Of course, we've had a tremendous difficulty with inflation lately, but hopefully somewhat stabilized. And so, that interest rate is often at the top of people's mind. Again, I kind of previously mentioned labor rates, material costs, and all those things kind of combining to create a new reality on what it costs to expand. And hopefully we're somewhat at the top of that and somewhat stable to go forward and predict. So again, if we're talking about expanding and we're talking about the market, we're talking about interest rates and election cycles, and there's this idea that we're involved in a recession. It seems really scary. Of course, the definition of a recession is just that we're making slightly less GDP than we did the quarter before, not necessarily the end of the world. We can't continually have our GDP go up every quarter over and over again for the rest of our life. So there's bound to be a little bit of a recession here or there in the time that you're conducting your business. There are market cycles as far as supply of product. There was a period of time where there was so many apartment complexes being built in Charlotte that it takes a while from entitlements with land all the way through development to delivery. So we had a little bit of a flood of apartments for a period of time. In spite of that, and in spite of maybe some compression, there's so many people that continue to come into our area that I think absorption is just fine for multifamily. We also saw that with industrial. When COVID hit, we pivoted away from going to the office for a period of time and became very logistical. Anyone who's ridden up and down 85 sees the massive amount of tilt-up warehouses in our area. Some of those have sat vacant a little longer than I'm sure the speculative developers wanted. So we've got some market cycle type stuff. And then we've got this kind of idea that maybe prices will come back from where they once were. Wishful thinking. I think prices may compress a little because certain rents have been high, but certainly they're not going to return to where they were 4, 5, 6 years ago. Those days are gone. So when we're talking about all those things, that's like a market timing piece. And we start to stray from thinking about personal timing. Again, what if our business has grown? What if we really are in a stage of expansion that can't be ignored? What about space constraints? I don't want to run out and pay top dollar for something, but if I don't fit into the space that I'm in right now, producing the things that I'm producing, I'm thwarting my growth. I'm staying compressed because I can't expand. Sometimes business owners will end up with large amounts of cash trapped in their real estate. Is it time to maybe sell and lease, or consider a different refinance strategy so we can pull cash out of real estate, put it back in our business? A lot of people lease with have a very kind of short-minded approach or small-minded approach to leasing. They'll want to lease for the smallest amount of time possible. They'll insist on the idea that they're going to grow too quickly without thinking about, how much longer will this space work? Do I want to extend my right to stay here? Do I want to lease for a certain amount of time and then look to purchase? Again, those are more personal type decisions where I'm paying attention. I'm looking inside and paying attention to myself and my business as opposed to paying attention to the outside. Lastly, I see a lot of people in the market that it's like they've created a treadmill, they've created something, they've created a business they can't get off. They haven't thought about what it's going to take to step off that treadmill, what it's going to take to sell their business and move on to the next stage of their life. And I like to believe that I can be a critical partner in that succession planning. One of my favorite things is when someone calls me way ahead of time and wants advice on a situation that they know is going to come up. So a perfect example would be retirement. Another example would be we're 3 years into a 5-year lease, and we know that at the end of that 5 years, we've got to find a new space. 2 years is a short amount of time, not a long amount of time. And if you come to me and you're in 50,000 feet and you know you need 75 and you've got a couple years to pay attention, that I can work with. When you come to me and you're in 50,000 square feet and you want 75,000 and you have 2 months, man, you're going to make my job really hard. The idea that I can pull a rabbit out of the hat and make magic, I need time for those type of transactions to pivot, to be strategical, to think about what it's really going to take. When we're talking about 50,000 feet, 75,000 feet, I tell people all the time, they get this idea that they could close a lease out on a Friday and open up somewhere on a Monday. Like, no way. You have months of strategical moving and changing. So you've got to create an overlap. You have to ultimately double pay rent a little bit. And we can talk about rent abatement on the front end of a big lease so that you have an overlap. You're controlling 2 facilities at once and you can move in an organized fashion. You're not moving over the weekend when we're talking about spaces like that. What about a phone call? You're 68 years old and you call me up and tell me that in 2 years at the age of 70, you would like to step away from the business completely. There are so many ways that I can help you out. There's discussing what it takes to sell a business. While I'm not an expert at that yet, it's something I want to add to my bag of tricks, but it's really about your tax returns. And it's about paying attention to that. It's about thinking about how to make your business look the best possible before you go to market it. And then one of the greatest tricks is selling the business and leasing the building back to the new business owner for a period of time before you potentially sell it to that person. That creates income, passive income as you step away from your business, and potentially a sale of the building later to that person. It really stretches out and helps you plan for retirement. I was recently hired by a gentleman who shall remain nameless at this time that's selling a business. He had already received an LOI, a letter of intent from someone who wanted to buy the business, but I got hired to negotiate the lease terms with that new business owner. And he was wise to do so. He doesn't know how to structure a lease deal. He doesn't know the right rates or the right way to present it. And in doing so, I end up, I'm going to push for a 20-year term. I have a feeling in this particular scenario, there'll be an option to purchase at a certain point during that lease term, but I'm going to lock that up, really substantiate that income for him as he steps away from his business. So again, another great call to get when there's plenty of time to plan. But that's an example of where we're getting away from staring at the market and starting to pay attention to ourselves and our surroundings and leveraging our resources. I like to think I'm a great resource to leverage in times like that. So if we're thinking about, if we're thinking about expanding, one of my favorite things is to talk about how to expand strategically instead of reactively. And I think if you're listening, you understand. Strategically expanding is some of the things that I was just talking about. Am I, thinking through my business needs? Am I thinking through my head count? Am I paying attention to my machines, my equipment, my materials? And am I thinking about the best way to expand carefully? I bump into a lot of people that say, well, we've just built another building on our property. I mean, that probably sounds great, right? Already own the land, already like the location. We'll just put another building up. I'd like to challenge you to consider whether or not that is a good decision. I'm not saying it isn't. It might be a great decision. It might be the absolute right decision for you. But have you considered selling what you have and buying something bigger and more cohesive so you're not dealing with two buildings? Have you considered what it's going to take to exit that property once you go to sell it? Because building 2 or even 3 buildings on one piece of property that isn't parceled separately can be a challenge when it comes to selling. It's not as useful for people to be under 2 or 3 roofs as opposed to 1. So very few people think through that carefully and decide, yes, it is the right decision to build a building on a piece of property that I already own next to the one I'm already working in. What does it mean to expand reactively? I think we can all kind of create a scenario where, we say, well, we've been putting out fires all day. And, what do you do when you put out a fire? You pay attention to what kind of solutions exist to solve that problem. But it's a fire. It's called a fire for a reason. Think about your business and expanding it and saying that like, well, I'm putting out a fire. It's no way to go about expanding a business. So we wait until we've got stuff stacked up too high. We wait until the fire marshal comes and busts our behind for put too much junk in a building. We have Connex boxes strewn throughout the parking lot. We don't know where everything is, so we're paying people to kind of wander around and look for it. And then we realize, like, we need a bigger space. We've outgrown this. I might argue that you might have picked up on that you outgrew it some time ago. And that, again, hiring a real estate professional and giving them tons of runway, a full year, for example, to really look and plan or even build, which I would argue takes more like 3 years, something that meets your needs, is rarely done. I meet a lot of people who are being reactive and very few people that are being strategical. In essence, I'm picking on the entrepreneur a little bit. It's a hard job. It's a dream. You're breathing life into a business. You're, that's your baby. And so a lot of times you do end up in that kind of reactive capacity. I respect it. But man, the more time you can give someone to critically think about your situation, think through it, leverage your resources, and make a plan, the better off you'll be. Sometimes it does make sense to hold. It's not always the right move to expand. Sometimes bigger is not better. I meet plenty of people who, loved hanging duct work underneath the house and firing up an HVAC system and keeping people cool in the summer and hot in the winter, and started making some money at it and said, hey, I've done $1 million in business and I want to grow to 5 million. And they grow to 5 million and they're no longer hanging ductwork or firing up an HVAC unit. They're, they're an HR person and they're dealing with personnel problems and quality problems and they're miserable. So, again, an honest assessment about who you are, where you are, and if it makes sense to stay or it makes sense to grow is very important. It's a great way to figure out whether it's time to expand. We talked a little bit about partial expansion. Sometimes lease renegotiation could come into play. Depends on how big your place is, depends on your landlord, depends on a lot of things. But I do meet people in my business who deal with a lot of lease renegotiation based on a number of things. Just a slight mention of a sale leaseback. I don't bump into that a lot, but sometimes it makes sense. We've got a business. We know we have a really strong idea on how much longer we're going to operate that business. We can sell a building, lease it back. That creates an investment opportunity for someone. We can lease it back for the period of time that we expect to be in business. And so it's a way of pulling your cash out of the property and allowing the business to pay the rent as an option for different wealth building tools. Again, I talked a little bit about legacy planning. I am not a legacy planner, but I can most certainly help you take your business and slowly step away from it. Burnout, can be a big factor. People, my own parents worked, and they owned a bakery, and they worked and worked and worked, and helped put us all through college, and got to, made it through COVID. They told me we've made more money this year than we've ever made in our life, and they could not wait to retire, could not wait to step away, could not wait to sell their business, and didn't have the greatest plan to do so, and close their doors. It's a happy story. They're doing great, but sometimes some planning about, how to step away and understanding the timeline of that is critical, and something that I can help with. So now let's say we've met with our banker, our real estate professional, and we decide it's time to expand. Just a couple of thoughts. Sometimes owner financing exists in the market. It can be a really powerful tool. If you find somebody who does not have debt on a property that's willing to sell, a great way to help bridge the gap between their expected price and what you want to pay for the property is to allow them to finance the property for a period of time. This doesn't involve a bank, so it can be advantageous to both buyer and seller. At the SBA, the Small Business Administration, does back loans. That's essentially a banking institution that will loan you money that's backed by the government. So of course, people love that as a backing. SBA loans can be really favorable. I've seen some people use them. They're difficult to get. There's a lot of minutia, but again, if we have time and we can plan, a lot of times they have a much smaller down payment than a conventional loan, lower interest rate, and a longer amortization. So I had a client that built her gym that way. She had excellent equity in her house. She had some cash on hand. And more importantly, she had some great tax returns from running a really strong business. And so ultimately, she was able to get into a property for 10% down that she developed and built herself, 10% down, 25-year amortization, and I believe a point lower in interest rate than was typically offered on a commercial loan. And she was very strategic about that and did a really, really good job of going through that process and getting it done. But again, that a lot of times people will start to work through the buying process and say, hey, what if I used an SBA loan? It would be better for me. And that's true, but it turns off a seller because it's arduous. So getting way ahead in that process so that when you go to buy something and you're already 50% of the way through is it's a great strategy. When you show up and you really have your ducks in a row and you start talking about an SBA lending scenario, buyers are much more open to accept that and open to giving you the time that you need to use it. So some common mistakes that are made: waiting on clarity that never comes, listening to headlines instead of paying attention to my own business and my own needs, making a lease decision without thinking long term. How long am I going to be here? How long do I want to be able to extend? And treating real estate as a passive piece of your business instead of a strategic piece of your business. So bad markets don't kill deals, bad decisions do. So in closing, a couple of quick thoughts. You don't have to make a decision today, but you do have to start planning for decisions that are going to be made in the future. I'm someone who can help you silence the noise and think clearer. As we progress through this podcast, I'm hoping to arm you with different pieces of information and tools that'll help you make those decisions easier and more familiar. Thanks for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate you being here. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can unlock all of our content and never miss a beat. We've got a lot more conversations coming your way, and I'm excited to unlock even more of the commercial real estate industry with you in the next episode. We'll see you there.